Good evening. My lords, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to welcome you this evening to the ASI's Enlightenment Evening. Tonight, we are very excited to be joined by and hearing from David Seymour MP. David is the Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand and First Minister for Regulation, which I presume also includes within the portfolio deregulation. He is also the seventh leader of the ACT Party. The agenda for tonight, we will begin with an opening speech and some remarks from David on New Zealand and what we can learn from them and the challenges they're having over there and the opportunities as well. And then we'll move on to a fireside chat with Lord Hannan, who is in no need of further introduction, but as one of his many accolades, looks after international relations for the Conservative Party in the United Kingdom. And then lastly, we'll have a little bit of time at the end for questions and answers. So, David, over to you.
Good. Well, thank you. Well, thank you very much, James, and thank you everyone for coming along. If you knew that I was speaking and came anyway, then thank you twice. I really appreciate you being present, and to be honest, I had great fears about tonight. I was worried it might be me and my old friend Daniel and two other guys with a combined age of 180. But to see a group of young liberal Londoners here really warms my heart. So I really appreciate you being here. I went to some trouble to write a speech, and I had so much I wanted to say here that it got to about 2,800 words. That's the bad news. The good news is I typed so much that my laptop went dead. And the bad news is that the helpful people downstairs gave me a charger to revitalize it and print the speech. So I might have to tell you some of it anyway. I want to just also talk a little bit about how appropriate it is to have an institute named after a guy whose main objective was to alleviate human suffering, and in the course of doing so, invented what we know as modern economics or capitalism. I think there's something in that lesson. You know, the achievement is so staggering that you started with the same physical stuff as there was 250 years ago when The Wealth of Nations was written, and I gather you'll have a big anniversary next year. And yet, with the same stuff on earth, people freely pursuing their self-interest under the rule of law, creating a spontaneous order, has managed to organize that same stuff to double life expectancy and support 12 times more people on planet Earth. And that is the achievement of Adam Smith. And even the dreariest, dullest, whining socialist, and I got to tell you, they're becoming, I was walking here, and there was a group of them, you know, with the Palestine flag and the cart, and they were beating a drum as they went along. I thought, we're going backwards so rapidly through the evolutionary phase. It really was like something from a sort of tribal society. But even the dreariest of the socialists must be happy at the doubling of life expectancy. Who could be against an extra life, which is what they've got? Environmentalists. I can only guess what they really resent is the extra people. Now, I was asked actually to talk about the state of liberalism in New Zealand. And I want to break this into three parts. So first of all, I feel obliged, since I'm the Deputy Prime Minister of the country, to say that New Zealand is a very good bet. And I believe that, and there's reasons why, which I'll explain. The second, I want to talk a little bit about what Hayek, who I'm sure is another hero of many people here, said. We must make the building of a free society a deed of intellectual courage. And I want to talk about some of the areas where I think a bit of courage is needed right now. And I suspect a lot of those challenges, I'm going to talk about New Zealand, but you'll find them familiar here. And I want to finish by talking about the mojo problem, as I call it, that seems to infect too many liberal democratic societies today. Now, the reasons that New Zealand remains a good bet, some of them are stereotypical. There's the natural beauty of the place, there's the climate. My fiancée and I left winter in June, we came to summer in June. We're wearing exactly the same clothes, really sums it up. But most of all, there's our commitment to liberal democracy. And just about every indice you find, we're top 5, if not number 1. Last year's Human Freedom Index, which I think is a wonderful initiative, going back to Mike Walker and Milton Friedman in 1974, a real triumph of the think tank movement. The Human Freedom Index, we got knocked out of number 1 position by the Swiss last year. But we're 5 points ahead of Aussie, so we don't really care about that. And I'm also proud that I'm part of a government that is committed to liberal reform. We're going to balance our budget within our 4-year cycle, and we're doing that by making real per capita spending reductions each year of around about half a point to 2/3 of a point of GDP year on year in order to achieve that. When I get home, one of the first things I'll do is introduce legislation that will mean that most foreign investment into New Zealand will be consented within 15 business days. We're replacing our 34-year-old resource management law with a new regime that is being developed with property rights as the guiding principle. The underlying purpose of our resource management law will be the enjoyment of property. The right to object to someone else's enjoyment should be based on the diminution of yours. This is, I believe, will see us blazing a trail because we're changing the zeitgeist of planning. Economics is back with demonstrable externalities guiding planning decisions. And planning law, it doesn't just guide home building, also the infrastructure that connects the homes, the buildings where people work, shop and get educated. Sensible planning law is the ultimate affordability policy, and more important than that, it's the ultimate democracy policy, because if our ideas are going to survive, then property ownership must be something that is plausible and visible to generation after generation coming up in our society. We also, I believe, are a good bet in New Zealand because we're one of the most comfortable countries when it comes to immigration. And there's many parts of the world who are in real conflict over deciding who can join the club. And yet it's not unusual for New Zealand to have 150,000 people on a population of 5 million. That's 3%. That is, someone help me, a little bit like a couple of million new migrants coming into the UK in 1 year. That happens fairly frequently, and it's not a major political issue. In fact, I get more complaints from people who have issues with getting visas to enter the country than people who are worried about excessive immigration. So there is a lot of reasons why New Zealand is a good bet. A society on the frontier of the planet, a society built by pioneers with pioneering values. Now, that's all the good news. Let me show you where Liberals need courage, and let's see if these are some of the areas where you may agree. Courage is needed by Liberals around the world. They may or may not resonate with you, but I share them in the spirit of friendship between our countries. Of course, one of the first problems I'll point to is we've got a really unresponsive structure at the top of government. I wish we were liberalising more and faster, believe me. One of the largest obstacles to reform is the sedimentary nature of our government. And by that I mean it's kind of accreted like sedimentary rock over decades. And nobody striving for efficiency would start from where we've ended up. We have a government with 28 ministers, 2 undersecretaries. Only 20 of the 30 actually sit in cabinet. The other 10 are ministers but don't attend the meetings. Amongst them they have 82 portfolios in charge of 46 departments. Some individual ministers have 7 portfolios. And if you're thinking, God, I wish I got another wine at this point, I can understand that. We wonder, and you should wonder, how it can work. What's more, not all portfolios actually have a department. There's a minister for Auckland, the city I'm from. but the government has no Auckland department. There are also departments with multiple ministers. The Ministry of Education answers to 4 ministers. The Department of Internal Affairs has 7. All of these departments, however, have a really clear line of sight and simple basic accountability compared with the horrifically named Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, which answers to 23 different ministers. Basically, everyone who's a minister in New Zealand has some line into MB. I see just down the road you have a Ministry of Energy Efficiency and Net Zero. How long has that been around? I mean, seriously, I had to laugh, but I try not to criticise other countries' policies and politics. The key issue here is that it's very hard to get things done and hold people accountable for getting things done when you have so many lines of sight. The answer, I always try and give a solution and something positive, is a new set of rules. We should be saying, and we'll be campaigning on this, that every minister must actually sit in cabinet. That immediately gets you down to 20. Every minister must have an actual department. Every department must answer to only one minister, and no minister should be in charge of more than 2 departments. Now, restructuring government like that from the top, it's not going to deliver savings in and of itself, at least not the way that many in the public believe that if only we got rid of a few politicians, everything would be cheaper. What it will do is bring enormous savings over time by changing the underlying assumption of government. At the moment, there's a minister for every problem, even if they have no department. What I'm proposing makes the point of a minister to get results from a department in return for taxpayer money, so they face one question and one question only. What are taxpayers getting from your department for the budget allocated? That's a simple solution. And you have to wonder, if we're taking it seriously, why wouldn't we start with the org chart at the very head of the organisation? And as our dear friend Lennon said, most politics is simply a question of who, whom. We can't answer that at the moment, and if we can't at least answer Lennon's basic questions, then I don't think we're doing well enough. The second major issue that I think is a challenge for Liberals is the totally unsustainable approach to entitlements. Now, having a pay-as-you-go welfare state, where taxes in each year, transfers out, in and of itself is not a problem. What is a problem is the way it's been configured and effectively become a pyramid scheme due to demographics. It always relied on a small number of older people supported by a burgeoning army of young taxpayers that they'd produced. And the baby boom helped with that on the way in and on the way out. We now have a burgeoning army of retirees, soon to be 1 million out of 5 in our country, supported by a smaller number of taxpayers. If you add in that 1 in 6 working-age New Zealanders are on a benefit and a comprehensive system of transfers for working families, you find 1/3 of government spending is not actually producing any good or service that can't otherwise be produced. It is simply transferring cash in and cash out from one citizen to the next. It's 11% of the economy. And when you consider the bias inherent in progressive taxation, what it really means is if you put your head up over the parapet, you quickly get your money taken away and transferred to someone else. That is a real problem for any society that views itself as being a pioneering, aspirational place where people have moved for thousands of years, or at least hundreds of years, in order to give their children a better tomorrow. There's a major problem not only with spending, but also with ownership that we face. There's a few things you may not know about me. One of them is, I may not look it, but I'm a 50% shareholder in 28 companies. As Associate Finance Minister, I represent the taxpayer as a shareholder of Crown companies, from pesticide manufacturers to a post office, a TV station I don't watch, and a radio station I don't listen to, for good reason. But that's 1/3 of my associate finance portfolio, which also includes overseas investment I mentioned, and a role in the annual budget process. Most of these companies, perhaps as a result of being spread that thinly, are underperforming. And any rational person in my position would sell. But of course I can't, because that requires political agreement, so we just keep taking the losses on behalf of the taxpayer. It really is that simple. But my question is, where is the opportunity for orthodox debate? And it's exactly the same with property and housing, education, healthcare. The one thing you learn by examining government-owned buildings is the government should not build or own any more buildings ever. The temptation to sweat the assets, spend the depreciation, worry about the leaks next year is too strong. And meanwhile, as taxpayers, we're paying 2% of our GDP servicing debt for the pleasure of owning this portfolio. Now, I suspect New Zealand is not the only society that needs an honest conversation about the role of government as an owner. What does it own and why? We have a much more, I guess, peculiar New Zealand problem that you may have heard a bit about, and that is that the interpretation of our founding document, the Treaty of Waitangi, as a threat to the rule of law. We now have people who will say that liberal democracy is just one form of government, and not even a particularly good one. They even say that one person, one vote is an anachronism. Some of these people were elected to Parliament, amazingly, by the very system that they oppose, but it is a House of Representatives after all. Their preferred arrangement, I don't think has been particularly well explained, but so far as I can work out, they want the treaty to be interpreted as putting Māori and non-Māori and a partnership between races. Your constitutional standing in New Zealand should depend, according to this narrative, on your ancestry. Put another way, you should be ranked by the arrival time of your ancestors. And whether you can object to a development, receive healthcare as a priority, get entry to medical or dental school, whether you regard yourself as a real New Zealander or someone who's, quote, lucky to be here, as one of my colleagues was delightfully told by a rival party in Parliament a couple of weeks ago, can depend on whether you're tangata whenua, land people, or tangata tiriti, treaty people, those there because of the treaty but not rightly there, like land people. In daily life, if you work in government, you can find that your time is dominated by rituals that would seem outrageous in a secular liberal democracy, and they are. There's prayers said in Māori before any meeting, even before court hearings, a 45-minute welcoming ceremony, an assumption that Māori knowledge, despite never being written down, is not just one of many knowledge systems, but on a par with all other human knowledge combined. These types of belief have become the norm, and it's actually difficult to come up here and explain to people quite how bizarre life has become, how easily many, if not most, have come to accept it, and especially the backlash against anyone who challenges it. Too many people are afraid of the uncertainty that would be brought about if they were to defy it. But as one commentator recently wrote, what we actually need is clarity. Clarity around where tolerance ends and individual sovereignty begins. Now I want to return to this theme, and it's as simple as we need to start proudly believing in what a liberal democratic society can achieve. We're caught in a spiral where we allow every improvement to magnify remaining imperfections, making us feel worse about the world, even as we improve it. There's a whole section here about how useless our media is. I'm guessing you know all that. You probably got that problem here. You can read it when you publish the speech. But there's also what I call, at the heart of it, the mojo problem. Whether it's the lack of debate around what we own, what we spend, how we regulate, or what it means to be a citizen in a democracy like ours, or whether we fail to have meaningful reporting that creates a marketplace for ideas in the democratic world. All of these things, I believe, come back to this mojo problem. And at the heart is a failure to celebrate what countries like New Zealand and the UK have actually achieved. As I mentioned, 2 centuries, doubled life expectancy. What do you get from capitalism? An extra life. It's not too bad. We've achieved extraordinary progress in human rights, and yet we flagellate and oppress ourselves as if we're at some sort of all-time low. It's not supported by the facts. You just need to read A.C. Grayling, who I think has gone a bit wobbly lately, but Towards the Light of Liberty shows that human rights have never been more advanced, we've never been more freer, we've never more equally shared those human freedoms than we do today. Capitalists can afford to be environmentalists. You know, Greenpeace is selling memberships in Germany and the USA. How many Greenpeace members do you know from North Korea or Venezuela? Just ask yourself. Our ability to improve the world with better technology, the natural world that is, has never been better. And yet, how often do you hear people celebrate the achievements of the Enlightenment? Perhaps amongst people you know. But in the press each day, the 6 o'clock news, the newspapers, do you ever see an assumption that maybe we could be onto something here? Do you hear people saying that reason and empiricism, that making progress through conjecture and refutation is something we should be quite proud of? And how often do we admire the way liberty has flourished in golden ages around the world? Athens to Persia, Scotland, the United States. This freedom idea is not owned by any one culture. It's popped up at many times in the last couple of thousand years, and yet we don't celebrate the way that that has, and each time, alleviated human suffering and left more joy for our time on earth every time that we have let freedom flourish. And when do you see a celebration of a person, not for their group or identity, but for the fundamental human dignity as a thinking and valuing being? And the truth is that we don't know much about what's possible to be known. We don't even know who or how greater knowledge is going to be discovered. I mean, you look at those pictures of the Microsoft crew in the 70s. Would you have bet on those guys? I doubt it. It's only by realizing the creative powers of a free society that we actually create the conditions to solve more of life's problems. So whatever problems we face, my message for you is that we must all make a conscious effort to celebrate how many we've solved. And we must remember the values that have allowed us to solve them. Because by any objective measure, despite all the doom and gloom, we are living in a golden age. And that is possible because of an adherence to human freedom. We should be loath to throw any of that away. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you have a nice day. Thank you.
Well, David, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Daniel Hannan. I'm a Conservative member of the House of Lords, and it's my huge pleasure to welcome you here, David, to welcome you, first of all, to the National Liberal Club. I'm not sure how much you or people in the audience know about this club. It was founded by Gladstone in 1882. Gladstone had been a member of the Carlton Club for a lot longer than he'd been a member of the Conservative Party. He was a P-Light, he left the Tory Party, and he was only definitively not a Conservative when a group of young members of the Carlton Club threatened to throw him out of the window in 1852, and 3 decades later he founded this place. Best known for, perhaps it's an apocryphal story, but I really hope not, the Conservative politician F.E. Smith, who was a lawyer. He had his inns on that side, and he used to walk past here on his way to Parliament, and he found it a very convenient place to stop for a pee. And he made this his daily habit, much to the annoyance of the Liberal members of the club, who eventually got their secretary to confront him and say, "Sir, I have to ask, are you a member of this club?" And F.E. Smith, in bewilderment, said, "It's a club as well. So you're all very welcome. You're all very welcome to it." I see my colleague in the House of Lords, Lord Borwick, chuckling at this. I must tell you just one other gents' toilet club-related story, which is that when the gents in his club, the Garrick Club, were redone in the most beautiful marble way, one of the members commented famously, "Well, it's all very grand, but it makes my penis feel a bit shabby." So anyway, with that, welcome, and it's wonderful to have you here. So, David, let me start with something that maybe not everyone knows about you, which is that you were a think tanker. You were a proper think tanker. You spent time at the Manning Centre in Canada. You travelled around. You're proper Anglosphere free market institute guy. What's it like having moved from one side of the table to the other? You spent a career telling governments what to do. Now you are at the heart of a government as Deputy Prime Minister. What was the biggest surprise?
I don't know about a surprise, but I've sort of thought about whether one or the other is better for someone who ultimately wants to leave a freer society. And the truth is that you actually need both, because when you're in a think tank, you have enormous amounts of time to really go through a huge amount of detail about what's happening in public policy in the day and meditate on your own thoughts and get quite coherent ideas. Once you get into government, it's a little bit like, unfortunately, what Tom Cruise said in Top Gun: if you think, you're dead. And that explains a lot of what goes on in politics, you see. You never have less ability to think about public policy than when you have the most ability to influence it. And that's why I think think tanks like the Adam Smith Institute, I'm not massively familiar with your work, but I understand that you're a think tank that seeks to provide new policy ideas, are absolutely essential. But so too are people who are prepared to go into the public fray and appeal to the electorate to put them in a position to implement those ideas. So I believe that they have to work together.
So let me put the question in a slightly different way. There are people in this room who are associated with the Adam Smith Institute and who may think about having a future in elected politics. What advice would you give to them, or if you prefer, what advice would you give to your young self? What's the thing that they should take with them from the think tank world into the implementation world?
Look, I think it's true for both of them. If I was to start a think tank now, the first thing I would do is I would say everyone that works at the think tank has to go door knocking for half a day a week. They go and knock on the door, pick a street, knock on the door, say, hi, I'm here, I've got these ideas about how the world should be, what's important to you, and just see how that goes. I mean, to get elected, I knocked on 14,000 doors, which is not a lot in the English context because you've got more doors here, but but it's a lot of doors in New Zealand. And that certainly changed the way I looked at the world, because you ultimately have to have very good ideals and think hard about how markets work and make sure you know your Nobel Prize winners and you've actually got a logically consistent way the world could be. Otherwise, what's the point? You're just running from pillar to post. But you also have to understand how you can connect those philosophies or ways of being with the needs that people have, and actually explain to them how these needs will make them better, make their life better.
So let's stick with you getting elected. Your party, ACT, is a pure libertarian party, one of a small number in the world, and by far the most successful. One of the things that is striking when you look around the world is that although free marketeers and small government types can succeed as part of a broader conservative alliance in the way that Thatcher did or Reagan, your pure libertarians tend to have a pretty low ceiling electorally. I think the best that the US Libertarian Party ever did was 3.3%, and that was with a former state governor faced with the dire choice of Hillary and Trump in 2016. You got 9%, which is by far the best result in 2023, by far the best result, unless we count Javier Milei, which is a very special case. And I'm sure we can all agree that we don't want our country to get into the kind of situation that his was in before he became possible. So what was your secret? Other than the 14,000 doors, why did you do so much better?
Well, we have a very clear idea of what business we're in. We're in the representation business. We hear people's concerns, and then we provide public policy solutions to those concerns, and we try to stay out of the he said, she said of day-to-day politics. Probably the time that we were most effective at that was the period of COVID-19. And we got as high as 18% in that period. So we were, 1 in 5 voters was saying they would vote for our party. That fell by the election, obviously, for a variety of reasons. But what we were doing in that time is we were saying, look, here is the epistemology, I was going to say, the epidemiology. On top of that is the policy, and on top of that is the politics. And we'd just get up every day and whatever was happening, was it getting vaccines into the country? Was it that people should be able to use rapid antigen tests as a substitute for vaccination if they didn't want it? Should people be able to have really clear rule of law around what you could and couldn't do, whether you agreed with the restrictions or not? Let's just start with the rule of law as an underlying premise. Let's think hard about what is the role of government, what's a market failure, when is regulation justified. We were able to lean on our libertarian, or I would just say orthodox economics, and apply that to what was happening in people's lives day after day. It allowed us also to show a lot of compassion for the suffering that people were having. So, that was in many ways a very good time for us.
Did the reaction of the electorate during the lockdown surprise you? Were you taken off guard by how many people loved to be bossed around and wanted the smack of firm government and opposed the lifting of restrictions when it came?
Oh, chilling. I mean, I always thought, those Germans are a bit funny, but we New Zealanders would, we believe in freedom. We're liberals. We're English liberals, right? Wow, like the enthusiasm with which people, were prepared to snitch on their neighbours, and it was just wild, really wild. That was a shock. But these things, I say the path, I believe the world is becoming a freer place. It's just the path is not always linear. And there has been a reaction and a backlash that I believe will leave us better off in the long term.
So a result of this, of course, Jacinda got re-elected. She was sly enough in the way that Justin Trudeau was to seek re-election at the height of the pandemic when it was still popular. The election that swept you and your allies into power was when the bills had come in, and that's been happening around the world. But for people who are not familiar with it, just talk us through a little bit how the coalition is working out. There's a three-party coalition. There's the traditional party of the centre-right, the Nationals. There's your party, the Libertarian Party, and then there's this sort of slightly Trumpier party, New Zealand First. But so far from the outside, you seem to be doing quite extraordinarily cohesive things, but maybe it looks different from where you are.
Yeah, so I know there's some Kiwis in the audience. Maybe just give you a bit of context. There's me. There's a guy called Winston Peters who's been in Parliament on and off since 1978, I think. And then there's Chris Luxon, who is a corporate guy who's the chief executive of the national airline and now runs basically the Tory party. And we all need each other. That's the underlying reality. So we signed really sound coalition agreements. We've so far decided that the coalition agreement is religion and that we will keep to that, and we're just implementing one thing after another. So, it's been much more robust than our worst enemies could ever have feared, for the simple reason that there's this imperative that the country's in deep trouble. There's very little tolerance for political shenanigans, and we've each got a carved out coalition agreement that we want to implement. So it's worked better than we thought.
So one part of that, just coming back to what James said in introducing you, is deregulation. And there are a couple of things that I thought were very exciting, like New Zealand, for example, being prepared to accept other people's approved pharmaceuticals without needing to do its own test. I mean, that seems to me a very obviously good thing that will be resisted everywhere. But there's a much bigger agenda than that, isn't there? You're in charge of looking at what the impact of regulations and deregulation. Just again, I think most people in the room will be unfamiliar with it and will be happy to hear what you're doing. So talk us through how that works.
Yeah, so I mean, as having my sort of view of the world, I think the government has the potential to do great harm, and often actually exceeds its potential. And we Liberals try and find ways to restrain it. So, Magna Carta was a pretty good nudge, and there's been several attempts since then. I think what is really critical is that we respect democracy, and that means reducing the cost to voters of monitoring politicians who make bad policy. At the moment, it's very challenging for voters to monitor what's going on. The world's just become more complex. There's a lot of stuff going on. You're disillusioned. You get a lot of populism around the world because it's hard to figure out, who's actually responsible for doing what. More recently in New Zealand, we've had a number of initiatives. The Reserve Bank Act, making the relationship between the government of the day and the central bank transparent. We were first to do that. It's been copied around the world, including here, where the Minister of Finance, or Chancellor of the Exchequer in your language, has to be really transparent with the world about what they're asking of the central bank, currency-wise. So that's killed inflation for the most part. We've done that with our fiscal rules. So our Public Finance Act requires that twice a year, including right before an election, the government must publish independently prepared and verified fiscal accounts with a 15-year forecast. So we can actually, you can cook the books, but people are going to find out right before you ask them to vote for you. These transparency mechanisms have been really important. However, if screwing the money supply or the fiscals are two ways that you can harm people, I would argue that regulating the use and exchange of private property, that is limiting the productive capacity of all the stuff the government hasn't already pilfered, is actually far more important than does it waste money or does it deflate the currency. Because once you start restricting the use and exchange of property, your ability to produce any wealth in the first place before that other pilfering can happen is reduced. So the Regulatory Standards Bill is our core initiative in this area, and it's scheduled, well, it's just been introduced to Parliament, it's scheduled to pass by the end of this year and be implemented next year. Says, look, these are a set of principles: the rule of law, equal treatment, accessibility, decision-making of the courts, liberties. No initiative should take away someone's liberty unless it's there to preserve, or to prevent the harm to others' liberties. So, a restriction. Most of the things in the Crimes Act, for example, would fit that bill. Impairment of property. You can't impair property rights without compensation. Problem definition, identifying market failures, identifying winners and losers, assessing the costs and the benefits of a rule. Publishing that in a transparent and robust way, and then having effectively an appeals body of regulatory economists that you can complain to if you don't think the government of the day is doing it. All of this is designed to improve the transparency of lawmaking and reduce the cost to voters of monitoring bad lawmakers. So this is, in some ways, it sounds pretty bureaucratic. It's sort of quite different. But in New Zealand, we've had for 25 years people sitting around saying, how do we restrain the regulatory state? And this is the culmination of that, and we hope that it's going to quite dramatically change the regulatory behaviour in New Zealand.
A very exciting initiative that it could have really far-reaching global consequences if it has the effect that we hope. One subset of regulating the use of private property, the outgoing Labour government in New Zealand had passed this total ban on smoking. It was the only country in the world to be phasing out smoking altogether. Rishi Sunak then came in here and said, we're going to do the same thing, and the bill went through Parliament. You and your coalition allies then got in and repealed it, which has not happened here. And I know the Adam Smith Institute has a great campaign to try and do it. So Rishi's one bit of cover, which is the only other country in the world that has done this, has been taken away. But Starmer is still determined to do it. Now, was it difficult for you to undo that legislation? Did you run into the authoritarian tendency of the electorate?
Not really, because the laws that we repealed had not come into effect. And there's a lesson in this. If you're going to do something, do it early, get it into effect, and make it a thing before the next election. Otherwise, you're just whistling in the wind. So they, just for people who may or may not know, they were going to introduce a limited number of vendors. So there were going to be, I think, only several hundred tobacco sellers in the whole country. And that was going to mean that some of these places would be shifting hundreds of thousands of dollars a day from one place, which the security and the logistics of that would have been crazy. They were going to introduce some tiny percentage of nicotine, so you just get lots of angry people basically sucking lots of smoke and tar but not actually getting the thing that they were trying to get. And so that was going to drive a lot of people mad. And then there was going to be a shifting age. So basically, if you were born after a certain date, I think 2010, then you would never be able to buy cigarettes in New Zealand because the age would go up every year. It was quite evil in a way. And so we repealed all of that, but it had never actually been law. I mean, for what it's worth, I just think It's one of those really interesting issues. And you were saying to me earlier, there's a big difference between I don't like something and something should be illegal. I think there's some things government can and should do around smoking. It should ensure people know the dangers. I don't think that's necessary anymore. I think people are well aware of that. It should make sure that people don't impose fiscal costs on each other. That's been more than done. In fact, actually, smokers are fiscal heroes. Like, if you want to save your country's balance sheet, light up, because, lots of excise tax, no pension. I mean, you're a hero. And then it should stop people from, the old "your freedom ends at my nose." I mean, you should prevent people from smoking in each other's face. But the truth is, we've mostly got that back to front. I mean, you can smoke on a beach or a public park, but you can't smoke on property that you might own. We should probably reverse that, to be honest. But my wider point is, everything that needs to be done around smoking was done long ago. It's time to just chill out. You know what? If you want to stop other people doing stupid things, you've got to be prepared to stop doing every stupid thing and every other person's opinion yourself. And personally, I'm not.
Well, sure. Thank you. A round of applause for that. Thank you very much, Steve, for kicking it off. So, let's just stick with this idea. I mean, if I had to summarize my philosophy in one sentence, it's the difference between I don't like this and this should be banned, right? I wish more people would understand that, even when this is something that you really, really don't like. But the collectivism that has crept into all Western politics since the lockdown, I would say, and often takes the form of identity politics in a particularly aggressive collectivist way. I think it's no coincidence that the BLM dementia of 2020 happened during lockdown, when everyone was hunched over their screens. But it was a chillingly illiberal moment, and it was echoed in every other Anglosphere country. People tried to import their version of BLM, however implausibly and however badly it fitted local conditions. So in Canada, it took the form of this invented genocide in Indigenous boarding schools, which has now been completely falsified, but the falsification has not been reported in Canada in the way that the original bogus story was. In Australia, it took the form of the referendum on the Indigenous voice to Parliament. In this country, we just cosplayed all being Mississippians. We had, for me, the ultimate moment of the British mad summer of 2020 was watching a white British BLM crowd right there on Whitehall shouting, "Hands up, don't shoot," at unarmed metropolitan coppers. But in your country, it took the form that you hinted at. So
I'm still processing that.
It's glorious, absolutely glorious. No, it was really, it's ever since the West Wing, everyone in this country sees all racial questions through American eyes. And if you're a white conservative, they call you a Klansman. If you're a black conservative, they call you an Uncle Tom. Unbelievably rude, but also, what's it got to do with us? How is that us? Anyway, I wanted to focus in on your version of this madness, which was, as you say, there's a lot of sustained support for high levels of legal inward migration in New Zealand, but the madness takes the form of Waitangi and the treaty. And I think, first of all, it would just be very helpful if you explain why it is controversial to say, as you are saying, that all New Zealand citizens should be equal before the law. Why so many people have a problem with that, and why. And one of the things I've noticed is it's never mentioned that you are partly Maori. It's never mentioned by your as much as anyone is in New Zealand almost, if I can say that. But I wonder whether that doesn't intensify some of the attacks on you in the peculiar way in which the left classifies people. Obviously, there are plenty of Maori who agree with you, vote for you, but the professional activist class seem to have it in for you in a way that I've rarely heard such vitriol in New Zealand politics for other people.
So first of all, yes, I am part Māori and proudly so. But the problem seems, and I've thought about this a lot lately, I think the problem is that New Zealanders have got a structure. And the structure is that bad things happened, and yet we all atone. So we do karakia, which are prayers in Maori before a meeting. we try our best to do the language, and many people who try do a lot of damage to the language in the process. We will have a feigned equivalency between Mātauranga Māori or Maori knowledge and all the other science that exists in the world, which is absurd. I mean, this was, for all of its admirable aspects, a culture that did not have a written language, let alone a scientific method. We do all of this to atone for past sins. And I believe a lot of people think that this is completely nuts, but they've got to a stage where the consequences of speaking out and rebelling against it are far more worrisome than going along with it. So when someone comes along like me and says, look, sorry guys, the emperor's got no clothes, this is ridiculous, we should all just be thinking and valuing human beings, making the most of our time on earth so that we can try and solve our own problems and hopefully benefit others in doing so. It's not just some people, that it's half the society go completely nuts, because I've basically brought the spectre of disruption versus quiet acquiescence, which most people prefer. And that is the really scary thing about it. So my bill, which sought to define the so-called principles of the treaty as liberal, classical liberal principles, which actually are quite close to the treaty itself, which you would expect given that it was drafted by a Whiggish government in 1840, that really upset a lot of people. What's most interesting is that while we lost the vote, we never lost the argument. And if you have 2 hours and you hate yourself, then you can actually watch the whole debate in New Zealand Parliament. And nobody says, the bill says X. I disagree with X because Y. We'd have a better world if Z. You don't hear that. So yeah, we're disrupting an order that people get comfort from, that they're very discomforted by disrupting that order. But once you start to do it, you get people thinking, and I believe liberalism will win in the long term.
I've always found it an astonishing treaty, actually, for its time. Here you have a pact between a global superpower which had a hegemony that no one before or since had ever come close to. I mean, the height of its imperial moment, with a pre-literate Stone Age civilization, and it treats them as equals. And it's an equal treaty between two parties. Now, it is, of course, true that there have been violations. There are some things that were in the treaty that were impractical in a modern age. But the amazing thing is that it contains a vehicle for restitution and reparation in itself. And I think it's an extraordinary thing that people take for granted. I wanted to ask you about whether there is something intrinsically illiberal about the age we're going through. I worry that the backlash against the demented summer of 2020 will also take an illiberal form, a Trumpy, statist, wounded and victimhood-based form, what Konstantin Kisin calls the woke right. And there is there's always been something incredibly contradictory in the position of the people you were describing, who say we have to have prayers before everything, or in Canada or Australia have to say this, we meet on land owned by the Wonga Wonga tribe. If there is a collective racial claim on land, which is the implication of that, right? This is an unceded land, then how does that square with the idea of permitting immigrants to come anywhere, right? I mean, imagine if we started doing that in this country. So you've got a claim, exactly as you put it, based on how long your ancestors have been here. It's an utterly illiberal idea and utterly contradictory. And yet I fear that for that reason, people are not going to attack it on the grounds that you and I would, which is that the individual is above the collective. They're going to say, well, we put up with all this crap from your side, now see how you like it. And that really, really alarms me, because I think that ethnic identity politics comes very naturally to people. The merest glimpse at history tells us that.
Yeah, I've thought about this for a long time, and I think sometimes we kind of start with the assumption that liberalism is natural because we have lived through the most liberal period, and it is a golden age. The reality is that humans such as us have been around for about 300,000 years, and it's mostly involved bopping each other over the head with bits of stone. I mean, that's what most of our life has been like. It's really just the last couple of hundred years when things have been a bit better. And so you talk about a flickering flame of liberty. I mean, we must all make an effort to keep that alive. And I believe we'll succeed because the rewards when it works are so compelling. But the truth is that it would be much more normal to go back to bopping each other over the head with rocks than continue to be a liberal society. That's what we've got to fight against, that tide.
That seems to me a very good note on which to open this to the audience. So I will...